Chapter 2. Dart and Pup. She never liked cabbage. Half a world away from the simmering aisles, Dart stared at the plate covered in a soggy bog of boiled leaf. She fingered through the pile, searching for a bit of carrot and maybe, if she were lucky, a chunk of raven's egg. She liked Raven, believing the keen senses of the aerial hunter would flow into her if she ate enough eggs. As she bent to stare under her especially large leaf, something slapped the back of her head, bouncing her nose into her meal. She yipped in surprise. Enough, the matron of the conclave screeched at her, sounding like one of the feathered residents of the rookery at the top of the tower. "Eat, or I'll boil you into the next batch." Dart straightened, whipping the cabbage drippings from her nose. "Yes, mum." ... The other girls seated along the two tables of the third-floor commons laughed behind their hands, fingers pointed. "Because we're 13, maybe 8. Dart kept her face lowered. She was the youngest of the third floors, barely 13 birth years. Yeah, okay. Remember this. She's 13. But she already stood a head taller than the eldest. In fact, Dart had been named after the dartweed, a hardy plant that sprouted stubbornly between the cobbles of the courtyard, growing fast enough for the eye to follow, shoving its yellow head up after the sunshine. Even her unruly thatch of straw blonde hair matched the weed's hue. And, like her namesake, she was considered a nuisance here, an eyesore, something to be trampled underfoot. The conclave of Crimsferry was one of the most distinguished schools for training gentle boys and gentle girls in the art of proper service to a god's household. The finest families from the Nine Lands fought, bribed, and prayed for one of their offspring to be granted admittance. Dart, on the other hand, came here by chance. She was not from the blessed Nine Lands. The prior headmistress had discovered her among the hinterlands, where only road gods roamed in unsettled and barbarous country. Dart, as a newborn, was to have been sacrificed to one of the road gods. But the headmistress, a willful and pious woman, had stolen her away, whisked her out of the hinterlands and into the conclave. And though the woman died only 3 years later, Dart had been allowed to remain out of respect for the memory of the esteemed headmistress. Unfortunately, none of that respect had rubbed off on Dart. Finish your breakfast. My God, really? Finish your breaking fast. We can't just call it a breakfast, it's a breaking fast. Which, of course, what breakfast means, but still. The matron said, stalking away, "By the time I pass through here next, your plate had better be empty. That goes for all of you." Murmurs of dutiful assent followed in the woman's wide wake until she left the room. Dart pinched a leaf, studying its limp form with resignation. Sighing, she glanced under the table to where Pup lay curled at her feet. "How about helping me with this?" Pup stirred. He cocked his head in her direction. Dart frowned, knowing he couldn't help. She popped the cold wet leaf into her mouth, attempting to chew without breathing. Every fiber of her being fought her valiant effort, but at last she succeeded and swallowed the slimy lump. With a renewed determination, she set upon her plate, working down through the mountainous pile of boiled fare. Almost finished, she stared at the remaining leaves, disappointed. Not even a sliver of raven's egg. Moment drew her attention back across the table. Sissop and Jenny shifted and allowed Laurel to push between them. The eldest of the third floors reached over and dumped her load of cabbage atop Dart's plate. "What are you?" Dart began to complain. Laurel straightened. "Did anyone see me do that? I'm sure they didn't." Laughter followed from the other girls. With a flip of her long ebony hair, freshly washed and oiled by her family's servitors in residence, Laurel glanced back to Dart. "Eat up, dartweed. Maybe you'll fill out that boy's body you're wearing." Laurel leaned a hand on the table and stuck out her chest, posing like some harlot. More laughter met her antics. "Because remember, girls, What's important is the fact that you're a slut. 'Cause sluts are what make the world go round. Yeah, I'm sure that's something you really want to aspire to. At 14, Laura was already rounding into a woman. Probably not. Boys in the school dogged her footsteps, pining for a nod from her, a wink. All the girls worshipped her, too. Laura was from a well-to-do family out of Weldon Springs. She had her own servitors and showed small presents of honey cakes and cloth dolls to those in her favor. But of even more significance, rumors abound that Laura would surely be hand-picked at the next full moon's gathering, only 8 nights away. It was an honor they all craved, to be chosen as a handmaiden to one of the 100 gods of Marilla. The best of the remainder could hope for was to be assigned in some small measure to the court of a god, to bask from afar in such grace. Yet worst of all, many would simply be sent back to their families, humiliated and rejected. This was the worry they all shared, and even more so for Dart. She had no family and no other home. All that she possessed, her only family, lay curled at her feet. Still, the conclave of Chrismfairy lay in the very shadow of the elder god's castellation, and of all the conclaves, this school produced the most handmaidens and handmen. The teachers stressed this fact daily, imposing hard rules and firm teachings. The matrons and masters were proud of their school, the foundation stone of which had been blessed 4,000 years ago by Chrism himself. Laurel straightened with another flipper of flowing black hair. Dirt smelled the sweet water oil in it. She truly felt like a weed before a flower. Suddenly Laurel yelped. She danced from the table. "What's wrong?" Sissop asked. Jenny was already on her feet. Laurel shifted up the hem of her skirt, revealing an ankle in white stockings. A bloom of red spread across the white lace. "Something scratched me." Sissop fell to her knees, searching under the table. "Maybe a nail? Or a sliver," Jenny said. "These cruel pinches are as old as the stones." Dart knew better. Though no one could see Pup, she motioned her secret friend closer to her. She ducked lower, pretending to search for one injured Laurel. "Bad dog," she whispered. Pup lowered his head, wincing, glancing back toward the bloody ankle. He gained his clawed feet and shoved between Dart's legs, passing ghostly through the flesh of her thighs as he sought a place to hide under her skirt. The only sign of his passing was a slight chill on her skin. His face appeared from her hemline, poking through the fabric as if it were air, his head cocked up toward her, eyes mournful with shame. She felt bad scolding him. He was simply too ugly to be mad at for. Wow, you are a dick. You are a dick to your dog. Wow. He was simply too ugly to be mad at for long. His features were dreadful and all hard planes of beaten copper, with iron spikes and a mane around his face. His eyes were faceted jewels above the muzzle filled with sharp blades. His tongue was a lap of flame. The rest of his body, squat and bulky, was a mix of armor and chainmail, with 4 thick limbs ending in steel claws. All of it glowed rudely and seemed to flow and melt in swirls, subtly reforming her friend at every moment. Pup was like a sculpture fresh from the forge, still molten from the flame's touch. She reached down to reassure him, but as always, her hand passed through Pup. He wasn't real. Still bent over, she glanced to Laurel's bloody ankle. Dart knew Pup scratched her. At all times in the past, he had done such things, affected the real world. Dart didn't understand how this could happen. In fact, she had no idea what Pup was, only that he was her friend, her companion for as far back as she could remember. She had long given up trying to convince others of his existence. Only she saw him, and no one could touch him. "It looks like a deep scratch," Marguerite said, coming to the aid of her best friend. Though Marguerite's family was from the opposite end of the Nine Lands, she could have been Laurel's twin with her sleek fall of black hair, snowy skin, and full lips. She even dressed in the same finery of blue velvet and white stockings. "We should fetch Healer Paltry." Though Laurel's cheeks were flushed and her eyes moist with tears, she waved such a thought away, struggling for a dismissive demeanor. "I'm not a piddling first floor." She bent and ripped her stockings, which earned a shocked cry from Sissop, who was not from such a rich family. Laurel used to the snatch of lace to bind her wound, which had almost stopped bleeding already. It truly was not a deep scratch. Pup had barely nicked her. Laurel inspected her handiwork, then nodded and stood. A smatter of applause rewarded her efforts. "She's so brave," Jenny muttered to Dart as Laurel left with Marguerite. I'm just gonna say Marguerite. In tow, the niggleish prank on Dart had been all but forgotten. Almost. Matron Grannis appeared at the doorway, ringing the small bell. To your classes now, gentle lasses. No dawdling. Don't keep the mistresses and masters waiting." She worked down the 2 rows, adding her usual litany of warnings. "Sharon, make sure you keep your ankles covered when climbing the stairs. Belle, if you stain your petticoat with ink again, I'll make a washerwoman out of you. And Hessie," the scolding continued, trailed by a chant of "Yes, Mum," as the girls fled the commons, heading to the morning teachings. Dart held her breath, staring at her laden plate. Matron Grannis stopped behind her. Though Dart kept her back turned, she sensed the sour look. "Why are you always such a stubborn and wilful child?" From under the lowered brows, Dart glanced to the door and saw Laurel standing there, staring back. At her side, Margaret waggled fingers toward Dart, smiling at her predicament. "Answer me," Grannis barked. Dart met Laurel's eyes and mumbled, "I don't know, Mum." "And why do you always speak as if you're carrying a cheek full of nuts?" "Sorry, Mum." Dart watched as Laurel nodded back to her, satisfied that the prank would not be laid at her feet. Laurel left with Marguerite, but not before Dart noted a glimpse of something deeper in the other girl's eyes. It was as if it was not satisfaction, nor shame. It made no sense, but Dart could not dismiss what she had seen. Always off to the side, Dart had learned to read the subtleties in another's features, the narrowing of an eye, a pursed lip, a flush of color on the cheeks. But what she saw in Laurel still made no sense. Why would Laurel envy me? Matron Grannis interrupted her retrieve. "It seems there is only one way to straighten this arrogant bent, and that is to learn from those even more willful than you. Mum? It's off to the rookery with you. Perhaps a morning of scooping droppings, scrubbing floors, and spreading hay will temper your demeanor, young lass. But classes?" Dart sat up straighter. "We're to practice for the moon's ceremony." Grannis let out an exasperated sigh. "You can practice with the ravens." Dart's ear was grabbed and she was hauled to her feet. "You know where the pails and brooms and brushes are. Now off with you." Dart hurried from the room with a rush of her skirts. She saw the last few of the other girls heading down the stairs, giggling and laughing, clutching books to their bosoms. They were 5th and 6th floors, heading down to the courtyard and classes in the neighboring towers. She watched them disappear, then faced the spiraling stair that led upward. "To me, Pup," she mumbled and began the long climb toward the rookery in the roost atop the tower. Her companion climbed past her, trotting a few steps ahead. The flow of his molten body seemed agitated. Pup was clearly excited by the adventure. They climbed the 4th and 5th floors, then passed the levels that quartered the mistresses and matrons and healing wards, then up past levels vacant and dusty. At last, she reached the door at the top of the tower. Beyond it lay the rookery. Pup nosed the solid, squalid wood, then passed through it as if it were mere smoke. The only material that ever seemed to thwart Pup was stone. Continuing after her friend, Dart tugged the latch and hauled the way open herself. She had to lean out with her slight body to fight the door's weight and ancient hinges. The door squealed open, setting the ravens inside to flapping on their 100 perches and nests. Screech complaints echoed across the cavernous stone chamber. She dug through and pulled the door behind her, leaving it cracked open to allow the outer hall's torchlight to filter in. The only other illumination came from the 20 guano-stained windows high up in the walls. The remainder of the room was cloaked in gloom. Large eyes reflected the meager light stared down at her. The birds did not like their slumber disturbed. When not aloft, carrying messages, the residents were kept busy at night, keeping the conclave grounds clear of mice, rats, and voles. The birds were also a source of eggs and meat for the kitchens. Crinkling her nose at stinging smell of the place, she crossed to a small cupboard inset against the wall. She would stink like the rookery all day. Inside the cupboard were buckets, brushes, and brooms in their usual places. She tied her skirt around her knees and set to sweeping the old hay and dried droppings. It was mindless work. As she swept, Pup chased after the broom's straw bristles, biting playfully, his razor jaws passing harmlessly through the bristles. Still, his determined efforts drew a smile from her. "Stupid dog," she mumbled with a grin. With the floor finally swept, Dart still had to give the planks a good scrubbing on her hands and knees, then bring one of the stacked bales of hay and spread fresh straw, as she had done so often before. Wiping her brow, she crossed to the corner pump and cranked the plunge handle. It was hard work drawing water up from the mid-tower cistern. As she labored, something warm and wet slapped against her cheek. Scowling, she wiped it away. Raven shit. I'm not going to dignify this by saying shite anymore. I'm just going to say shit. She glanced up toward the rafters. "Thank you for your blessing, Lord Raven." With a shake of her head, she set to the pump again, hauling its handle up and down. Sweat trickled down her back. The day was warming out of morning toward midday. She could only imagine her fellow third floorers practicing their curtsies and bows for the ceremony, learning the proper responses and reciting the litany of 9 graces. She sang out as she pumped, naming each grace as she pulled, and its property as she pushed. Blood, to open the way. Seed or minces, to bless. Sweat, to imbue. Tears, to swell. Saliva, to ebb. Phlegm, to manifest. Yellow bile, to gift. Black, to take away. To take it all away. Okay, I just want to stop and say, ew! Gross! Like, really? Why? Just why? Why would you want to do a magic system based around people's blood? Okay, blood I can understand, but a guy's seed, their sperm, or a woman's period blood? Why their sweat? Tears? Maybe. Saliva? No. Their mucus that they cough up or from their nose? No. Yellow bile, their piss, or black, which is their shit. That is gross. That is just so gross. Ew. As she finished, water flowed from the spigot into the bucket. She allowed it to overflow. She needed an entire bucket to wash the floor. With her pail full, she straightened, hot and moist from her effort. She crossed to the ladder and pushed it toward one of the high windows. Just a little breeze and a bit of freshened air. Then I'll get back to the chore, which I don't know why we need an ellipses there, but we did. She climbed the ladder. Once at the opening, she shoved her head through. Only now did she notice how much her eyes and nose burned from the reek of the rookery. She took deep, gulping breaths. All of Kim's Ferry lay sprawled below her. The city spread in walls, canals, and roofs, all the way to the horizon. It was split in halves by the mighty Tiger River, shining silver in the sunlight. It was said that the city was so wide that it took a man on foot 10 days to cross from one end to the other. There was a common response when one spoke about its vastness. The world is the city, and the city is the world. Gazing from the window, Dart saw it was true. Set like a jewel in the heart of the first of the 9 lands, Kim's Ferry was a hub around which the world turned. The entire surrounding countryside, from shore to shore, fed the city, barging up from the coast, carting down from the fields, flown in on the pot-bellied flipper crafts. The city was insatiable. And at the center of it all stood the great castellation of the eldermost god, Chrism. Dart, resting her chin on her finger, stared at the walled and towered fortress. A vast 1,000-acre garden spread out from its southern side, shadowed by the castellation itself. Wooded, it looked more like a forest than a garden, fitting for a god of the loam. Now, because I don't know what loam is, I'm going to pause and look it up. Loam is soil composed of sand, silt, and clay in relatively even portions. So he's god of earth. And like Lord Chrism himself, his castellation was both noble and humble. Its walls were thick white granite, quarried locally and unadorned. The main keep had been built on the site of the original ferry bridge that once forded the Tiger River. The structure rose from both shores and spanned the waterway in between. The center halls were held above the river by giant ancient pillars, all that was left of the original bridge. Even its 9 towers, the stone graces, shared the river. 4 rose from the north bank, 4 on the south, while the last and tallest rose above the river itself. These towers were the same white stone, simple yet reassuring in their solitary. The only bits of decoration anywhere were the carved silver gates to the castellation, depicting the great sundering, the moment when the kingdom of the gods had been shattered and they appeared among the lands of Merelia. Dart sighed, dreaming of stepping through those brilliant gates some day. Until then, there were floors to clean. As she turned, the sharp creak of hinges startled her, loud in the stone space. Ravens stirred and squawked in complaint. Dart hopped down from the ladder, fearful of being caught idle. She found the gloom of the rookery suddenly oppressive. The door lay cracked open, wider by the handle-breadth, but no one was in sight. "Good morrow," she called. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer. Slowly her straining eyes began to pierce the darkness. Shadows retrieved. She saw no one. Must have been a crosswind, tugging at the door. Why do we need ellipses there? She turned to gather her pail and brush. As she bent away, the tower door crashed shut. Ravens screeched, a few took wing, crossing from one perch to another. Plots of guano rained around the room. The loss of the filtering torchlight from the hall drew the shadows toward her again, eating away the room. Is anyone there? Her voice was meeker this time, her throat tight with fear. Please. Again, ellipses for no reason. Footsteps answered, crossing toward her. She fell back against the stone wall. There's no need to fret, little kitten. The voice was soft and deep. A figure appeared out of the gloom, large and broad-shouldered. There's going to be rape, isn't there? Rape of a 13-year-old. Dart recognized the voice of Master Willett, a scholar of the conclave. As he stepped into the patch of sunlight flowing from the window, she saw he wore the usual sashed black robe of the conclave, his hood thrown back. As was customary for the mistresses and masters, his head was shaved to the scalp. Dart stepped from the wall and curtsied with a half bend of the knee. Master Willett. He waved her out of the gloom under the window and into his patch of sunlight. Come, child, what are you doing up here all alone? Dart slumped forward. Punishment, Master Willett. She curtsied again, in case he hadn't seen her first one. So I've been told. Dart felt a rush of heat on her cheek. Her humiliation knew no end. It seems you've been a slovenly pupil, needing additional tutoring. I was sent up here for a private lesson. Sir? Yeah, I think rape is imminent. Let's just say if rape happens, I'm going to be very angry. He stepped closer. A hand rose swiftly to her cheek. The back of his knuckle slid along her skin. Yep. Startled by his sudden touch, she fell back a step, but fingers snatched onto the collar of her shirt. She was yanked toward him, his other arm encircling her waist, and pulled her tight against him, lifting her onto her toes. Master Willett! Tears rose to her eyes, confused, terrified. Not a word, little kitten. He leaned down to her ear, his voice suddenly savage. Not now, not later, not ever. She struggled, lips found her throat pressing and hungry. She smelled garlic and spiced meats on his breath. No, she cried out. A hand struck her across the face, stinging, shocking. She tasted blood in her mouth. Not a sound, little kitten. His words were both angry and strangely thick. He shoved her to the wall, pinned her between the stone and his heavy body. She knew what he intended. Here at the school, they were trained in all of the humoral fluids, including the handling of a god's seed or menses. As such, they were instructed in the private ways of men and women. It was no great mystery. But it was a mystery forbidden to them. To serve a god, a handmaiden must be pure, untouched. Once bedded, all hope of such honor was gone. Just last year, a secret tryst between a young man and woman, both fifth floorers, had been discovered. They had been whipped and then banished from the conclave. Not a word, he growled again, fingers at her throat. His other hand reached down between her legs, under the tied edges of her skirt. Fingers tore at her undergarments, ripping and pulling. Tears ran down Dart's face, burning with shame and horror. She couldn't breathe. She stared over the master's head as he panted and pawned. 100 pairs of eyes stared down at her from the rafter, silent witnesses. And there was one other. Pup ran in circles at her feet, passing through her flesh, biting at her attacker, but his razor teeth found no puncture. The bit of energy he had used to scratch Laurel must have wasted his reserves. Dart felt just as helpless. Below, fingers found what they had been searching for, cupping against her skin. She had been touched like this in the past only by healers testing her virginity. But now it was rougher, horrific. A scream built behind her ribs. Then the hand moved away. Now for your lesson, he groaned at her. To show you how to please a god. She was forced to the floor, on her back. He straddled atop her, pulling up his robes. He wore nothing underneath. What a shocker. He kneed her legs apart and shoved her skirts above her hips. She fought against him, but this only seemed to make him grunt harder and his eyes glint more feral. She sobbed and choked and even tried to bite him. She would lose more than her virginity here on this floor. She would lose all her hopes for herself, for her future, for the only home she knew. But there was no stopping him. He was huge, outweighed by her 10 stone. All she could do was cry and sob. Terror had taken all her strength away. 30 pages in. 2 mentions of maybe rape to the male character, but our first instance with the female character being threatened by a man, and then her I had praise for this book for not only suggesting in a book that anybody can buy, first thing they suggest is a male raping a male. Unless you like manga, and especially unless you like yaoi, that doesn't happen in books. I can guarantee every book I own in my house that is strictly English, written by an English speaker, they're not going to contain any form of a dude being attracted to another dude, let alone raping him, with maybe the exception of the Savannah Ride mysteries. And even then, rape doesn't happen between those two guys because it's consensual. So I had props with this guy writing a character like that, but not actually resorting to real rape. You know, not only did he have something homosexual in his stories, which is rare when I generally find a book I want to read, but also he, talks about men also being raped, which is usually seen as a myth. I can give props to that. I really can. But then we go and we mention it a second time. And then we mention how nobody would want to rape him. But the first time you're introduced to the female character, we're not even hinted at the chance that rape could happen or anything. It just does. And now that rape is imminent, suddenly her being a virgin, a 13-year-old virgin, mind you, is suddenly important. So then we're told this. Let me guess, as I keep reading, it's better and more rage-inducing. Also, this guy, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't know anything about English, like England English. So I don't know why he's using stone and crap. Does any American actually know what stone ends up translating to in American English? guys, if you like something like this, fine, go pick this book up. But this, I hate this story. I don't want to read it anymore. I'm only halfway through the second chapter. I hate this shit. She turned her face. Pup lay near her head. His eyes glowed with fury. Though forever silent, Dart imagined him whining, sharing her pain and her terror. When she felt Willett shove inside her, ripping her, breaking her, blood flowed. We're not even past page 30! We're not even Are you stupid? What the fuck possessed you to write such crap? This whole thing has been nothing but crap. Nothing but crap. The story sucks. What were you thinking? Then she felt Willett shove inside her, ripping her, breaking her. Blood flowed. The scream burst from her lips. But she was ready for this. A fistful of her own skirt was shoved into her mouth. I was about to say, she was ready for this, really? But he was ready even for this. A fistful of her own skirt was shoved into her mouth, gagging her. I am your god, he moaned. So this dude is also a blasphemer. I'm sure the local god will really appreciate not only you blaspheming him, but also probably wouldn't like your pride very much, on top of the fact that you just raped somebody, as well as made him lose a possible handmaiden. Yeah, I don't think they would take kindly to their servants being wailed upon. Pup was again on his feet, diving through her body, his cold touch. That's not a sentence. Oh, his touch cold. He shoved down between her legs, his frigid wake ebbing some of the pain. When he reached her belly, ice flared. The momentary agony vanished, washed away. She felt nothing below her waist. Still, Willett continued to run into her, pounding and pushing, grunting and panting. Dart squeezed her eyes closed, wishing herself away, but there was no escape. She could smell him, hear him, feel his lips on her neck. Then the monster arched back from her, gasping out through clenched teeth. Dart cringed, but Master Willett's cry of pleasure suddenly transfigured into a scream of pain. He fell back from the cradle of her thighs. Dart opened her eyes in time to see an arc of blood sprout from the man's groin, fountaining up like a stream of piss. You, sir, have an elegant way with words. Like, really, what masterful way of words you have. Nothing lay between the man's legs. The same was not true of Dart. Still numb, unable to move her legs, she watched Pup crawl out of her belly, rising up between her thighs, covered in her own blood. The small creature spat out the limp chunk of flesh, the man's prick and his sack. Pup had bitten it all off from the inside. Pup, she moaned, feeling returned to her, agony flaring as her friend climbed free of her. Only then did she notice. Willett's eyes grew wide with horror. He was staring at Pup, seeing her monstrous friend for the first time. It was the last thing he ever saw. Pup leaped at the cowing man, becoming a blur of blade, spike, and razor teeth. He dove into the man's belly, burrowing straight through, but Pup was no longer a ghost. Flesh sizzled and burned with the touch of his molten skin. Curved spikes tore through flesh and bone. A horrible howl accompanied the slaughter. Guys, if you've been following bad fanfiction theater, you might be familiar with a certain story called Forbidden Fruit, The Temptation of Edward Cullen. In that story, there is a character that pops up called Uncle Larry. He just suddenly appears. You know the whole reason this character, Uncle Larry, exists? To antagonize and immediately rape the main character. The whole reason this character exists is to make the main character, in this case Dart, is to make you sympathize with her and to see that, oh no, her life is so bad. We have to save her. She's in danger. Something incredibly horrible is happening to her. Now that's not to belittle people who are raped, because it is a horrible thing, and if at all possible, you need to be rescued from that happening. However, as a story device, and we went over this in talk time, and I'll go over this and go over this and go over this if I have to. Rape should not ever be a female character's sole plot device to get her to do something that she would never normally do. Women can be strong by doing other things. A woman surviving rape is a very strong woman. Moving on from her horrific rape event in and of itself makes her strong. However, please stop, every writer, every story creator, please stop using rape as a character building device for female characters. This can be done with guy characters too if you like yaoi. Please stop. Rape is a very serious thing. Don't use it lightly, and especially don't use it as a thing to motivate your character to change and become stronger. Cassandra, my character in Cat Dragon, begins to have a feud with the lust demon Lukosi. Yes, Lukosi likes sex. Yes, Lukosi has raped a lot. He's even threatened to rape Cassandra, and everybody Cassandra cares very deeply about. But you know what doesn't actually happen? Spoilers, Cassandra doesn't get raped. Why does Cassandra not get raped? Well, Cassandra doesn't get raped because that's not what makes her a good character. That's not what drives her character forward to make life-changing decisions. Cassandra is already a strong character. She just has to believe in herself to rise above other people's expectations and do things on her own. She doesn't need to be raped to further her character. Lukosi doesn't have to rape to be a complete asshole. He just has to be. Stop using rape as a means for female character storytelling. There are other ways you could have gotten this character to leave this conclave, and it didn't have to involve her getting raped. Something else could have easily happened that didn't involve her getting raped. It doesn't make your story dark and gritty. It doesn't make it more serious, because the truth is, you have no idea what the fuck you're writing about. You just have a fucking rape fetish. And if you have a rape fetish, you have a rape kink, that's fine. I enjoy non-con stories, but I also enjoy my non-con written well, with characters that are written well, not shitty throwaway villains. Stop it and get the fuck out. On hands and knees, Dart fled to the far side of the room. She had worked in the kitchens. She had seen meat ground into sausages, metal turning organ to pulp. This was the same. In moments butchered to scrap, nothing remained of the man. Pup crawled free of the pile, shaking blood and bits of gore from his spiked mane, coughing up gouts of scorched meat. With a final shudder, his body blazed into brightness, a burning ember blown to life. In that moment, Pup shone with a terrible and fierce beauty. An intelligence beyond her friends stared into this world as a keening wail filled the chamber. Shadows thickened and billowed outward from his form, sweeping through the room. Ravens, silent sentinels until this moment, shattered from their perches in panic of wings and feathers. As a flock, they dove out the windows and were gone. Alone now, Dart cowered, trapped between horror and panic, but no further harm came to her. The shadows fell under their weight, sinking to the floor, vanishing away. The piercing wail vanished with them. Pup remained in the center of the room, his blaze doused to its usual ruddy hue. He was now clean, unsoiled, as was the rest of the rookery. Numb, Dart watched Pup cross the spotless floor, trotting to her side, as he had done all her life. He sat at her feet and groomed himself with a flaming tongue. Dart reached a trembling hand out to her friend, but her fingers passed through him. He had gone ghostly again. How? She took a step away, suddenly fearful, but as she moved, her legs shuddered, her knees jellied. An ache throbbed throughout her belly. She felt a fresh trickle of blood flow down her thighs. Sobbing, she fell to her hands. The room spun. She vomited boiled cabbage all over the floor. Pup was there, nosing her, concerned. It was all too much. She fell on her side and curled herself on the floor, crying, sobbing, and shaking. She stared across the chamber. There was no sign of Master Willett, not even a stain of blood. All had vanished into the darkness. Had it happened? Had it all happened? A fist lay curled between her thighs, holding back the ache. She tugged her hand free. Her fingers were covered with blood. Pup belly crawled to her bosom. She reached to him again. Her bloody hand found warm flesh to touch. Pup pushed into her, rubbing into her stained palm. She could feel him. He was hard and warm, like an agate stone of a fire god, freshly blessed in blood. The answer was clear. Blood, she whispered. The effect was brief, as the heat drained the dampness from her palm. Her fingers fell through Pup's form. He was gone again. Allowing the mystery to distract her, she sat on the floor and pulled her knees up to her chin. With her arms wrapped around her shins, she shivered and shuddered, rocking slightly. Occasional sobs broke through, but she focused on merely breathing, in and out. The litany of 9 graces echoed in her mind. Blood to open the way, seed or menses to bless, sweat to imbue, tears to swell, saliva to ebb. But she kept coming back to the first. Blood to open the way. She stared at Pup, now curled at her side, and wondered the meaning of it all. A bell rang sharply out, rising from the courtyards below, announcing the ending of lessons. Only now did she notice the brightness of the western windows as the sun settled towards the horizon. She had been lost to the world for most of the day. One last sob shook through her. The reality of where she was and her situation could not be ignored. She carefully stretched her legs, rolling slowly to her feet with a groan. She stood for another long spell, dazed, at a loss in which direction to move. Who could she tell? What could she say? How could she explain? As these impossible questions and 1,000 others rattled through her skull, her feet took over. She found herself at the bucket she had filled in another life. She bent and picked up the scrub brush. She stared down at it, knowing her body had already settled on the answer. She was no longer pure. No one would believe the truth here. All that would be understood was that she was now spoiled, fouled for any god. Unfit to walk these halls, she would surely be cast out. But not this night. After what happened here, she could not survive banishment. Not this night. Dart knew what she must do. She shed her clothes and used the cold water and brush to clean her body. At first she worked in a half panic, fearing being caught. Her hands trembled, but slowly her fingers gripped the brush more securely. She concentrated on the simple act of bathing, falling back on ritual. The cool water helped calm her. Once clean, she dried herself with rags. She still bled, so she patted herself with her ripped undergarment and climbed back into her outers. She carefully inspected her skirts and rubbed dust and dried guano over any bloody spots hiding all evidence. She washed her hands in the pail and stared at her shattered reflection in the rocking waters. The girl who had climbed these steps was gone, vanished into the darkness as surely as Master Willet's butchered form. She stared at the spot on the floor. She would never return here. Her eyes settled next on Pup, sitting diligently, patiently. Like her, he had been transformed in this room, becoming a deeper mystery. She understood less about him, only that he had stood by her, protected her. For now, that was enough. Though the ache still lay buried deep inside her, where no scrub brush could ever reach, Dart put away her bucket and broom and broke open a bale of fresh hay. The smell of summer pasture filled the room as she kicked a fresh layer around the chamber. She spread it thick to fully cover the floor. By the time she was done, the windows to the east had gone dark, and the sun was but a weak glow to the west. She could no longer hide up here. She crossed to the door and pulled it open. The torchlight was blinding. As she blinked away the glare, laughter echoed up from far below, bright and cheerful. It sounded brittle and brought an ache to her head. Supper was already being served. No one seemed to remember the little girl up in the tower. No one missed Dart. She headed down the stairs. Each step hurt, reminding her of something she hadn't wanted to face. Someone had known she was up here. Someone let Master Willett pass up the stairs, and let him know a girl was alone in the rookery. Something darker than anger filled her. Whoever it was, they would pay. The dartweed that grew in the courtyard, her namesake, developed woody thorns as it aged. Ellipses, thorns that were seldom seen until they pierced the flesh. To me, Pup, she said quietly. To me. If this hadn't been some poorly written excuse to get her out into the wide open world, maybe this would have meant something to me. Maybe this would have been really serious and interesting to me. But it just feels tacked on. Why did you need her to be raped? Especially since I skipped ahead a little bit. There is no consequence for her being raped. So, her being raped is entirely pointless. She could have been attacked. She could have been beaten. She could have pissed somebody off and they had enough money to have her thrown out of the convent. So many other things could have happened to get her out of there than her being raped. Especially since you find out her being raped has no consequence to her situation. So you just had her raped because you wanted to have her raped. If you were standing here, author, I'd hit you multiple times with this book. Because that's disgusting. That's terrible. And you should feel very ashamed and retract this in an open statement. Chapter 3, Dungeon. It aren't that bad if you ignore the flies. Tyler studied the moving feast that was his meal. Flies coated the stew of gristle and fat. The crust of bread atop it looked to be milled more for mold than flour. But he'd had worse. He soaked the hard bread into the broth, trying to soften the crust enough to chew. Tiny worms used the bread as a raft, climbing aboard. "What about these maggots?" he asked sourly, shaking the crust clean of the squiggling stowaways. "Nothing wrong with 'em. Them's the only thing that gives this stew any taste." Tyler bit into the bread and glanced to the ragged rat of a man who had joined him in his cell that morning, tossed in naked and striped with whippings across his back. A head shorter than Taylor, he was all bone and beard. He sat upon the meal like a hinter king upon a feast. From the gray hairs laced in his red beard. He was not a young man, but what little muscle on him was still hard. About a decade older than myself, Tyler judged. The prisoner noted his attention. Name's Roger, he mumbled over the edge of his bowl. Tyler. So how's a Shadow Knight end up here? The man touched 3 fingers to the corner of his eye, indicating Tyler's tattoos. Apparently I killed a god. Roger choked out a gobbet of gristle. You! So you're the one! Tyler glanced up to the barred window high on the stone wall. He had been in prison here for 7 days. He did not had one visitor until now. No wonder there were so many guards in this hall, Roger continued, his face buried in his meal, spitting out pieces of bone as punctuation. I even spotted a pair of blood knullers at the end of each hall, reeking and covered in shit. Ew. Tyler nodded. Blood knullers were smeared in a god's black bile, or their poop. They're soft solids. Ew, that is so disgusting! Such a blessing granted the power to vanquish the grace of a person or object with the mere touch of a single finger. They were stationed to keep Tyler in check, in case he attempted to use dark graces to escape. Their continued presence seemed a waste since they already run their hands over his entire body when he first arrived here in shackles. If he had any hidden graces, they would have been abolished at that time. Still, Tyler understood their worry. While occasional rogue gods had been killed, never had one of the 100 been slain. No one was taking any chances. Roger coughed a piece of gristle loose from his throat and nodded at Tyler. It seems they must crowd all their god sinners into the same damn cell as this cursed island. Tyler returned his attention fully to the man. God sinner? You? What did you do? I was caught sneaking into old Balger's place, trying to nick a bit from the bastard's vault. At Foulsham Dell? Tyler asked, eyebrows raising. Balger was one of the 7 gods that shared the first land. His settled realm, Foulsham Dell, lay at the foot of Middleback Range, bordering the wilds of a hinterland, where rogue gods roamed and no law governed. The Dell was a place of murderers, pirates, and scoundrels, and the god Balger was the worst of the bunch, known equally for his debauchiness and his cruelties. He was as close to a rogue as any of the 100 settled gods. His entire realm made Punt seem a tame and civilized place. Tyler eyed the man, wondering what sort of thief tried to steal from such a god's launder. And I would have made it out of there, Roger added, if it hadn't been for some handmaiden coming to the vault to deposit a jar of her lord's blessed piss. A jar? You mean a repository? I have no idea how to say that. Repository. Shock rang in his voice. Repository jars were vessels of a god's hormonal fluids, sacred beyond measure, handled only by handmaidens and handmen. Roger nodded and laughed again, spraying spittle out his beard. Apparently old Balger has trouble holding his bladder throughout the night. So you were caught? As he ate, the man tilted to the side, baring his right buttock. A brand, long-heeled, had been burned into his flesh. Tyler eyed the sigil. It was ancient lyric. Thief, he read aloud. I don't understand. How did you end up in the dungeon on the Submarine Isles, 1,000 reaches from the Dell? Roger finished his bowl and gingerly settled back against the wall, wincing from his whipping. Because of you, now that I crank on it. Me? Roger lifted his arms and exposed the undersides. More lyric sigils lay burned into the thief's skin, aligned in neat rows. From his training as a Shadow Knight, Tyler recognized them, all names of gods. Balger's punishment, he mumbled, sickened. A pilgrimage, Roger conceded sourly. It was a cruel judgment, and not unexpected coming from a god of Balger's ilk. As punishment, Roger had been marked and exiled, forced to travel from god realm to god realm, sentenced to collect a certain number of brands. Only after you were properly marked could you return to your home and family. How many gods were you assigned? Roger sighed, lowering his arms. Remember, it was against Balger I sinned. Tyler's eyes grew wider. He didn't. A full pilgrimage, no less. All the gods? Every blessed one of them, all 100. Tyler finally understood why Roger was imprisoned here. And with Marin dead, you can't complete your punishment. Once I learned of her death, I tried to escape, but that's hard to do when you're standing between two guards, knocking on the damned gates to Marin's Castellan. They snatched me up, whipped me thrice for the rudeness, and tossed me in with you. What are they going to do with you? The usual choices, I imagine. Hanging, grouting, impaling. They were the 3 standard punishments meted to a pilgrim who failed in his journeys and tried to settle somewhere else. Considering it's impossible for this guy to get the last one, I think all should be forgiven. Even if that asshole of a god doesn't forgive him, it's kind of impossible now. I think I'll go with hanging. Garroting is too slow, and as for impaling, I prefer not to have anything shoved up my ass. Or arse in this case. He shifted uncomfortably. Course, I have a couple of days to think about it. They're still attending Her Highness up there, seeing if she's truly dead. Tyler sat up straighter. Is there hope? Hope is for the rich. All we have is shit and piss. And speaking of that, Roger climbed and crossed to the pail that served as the room's privy. As the day wore on and his thievish companion stretched on the floor, snoring, Tyler considered his companion's words. Could Marine still be alive? If so, she could clear his name, attest to his honor, that what little he still had left. But in his heart he knew better. He had seen the light fade from her eyes. Voices echoed down the dank hall of the dungeon, guards arguing when the stamps of boots sounded on the stone floor. Tyler climbed to his feet, hearing them approach. Roger continued to snore in his corner. Shadowed faces appeared at the small barred window. Open it, a familiar voice ordered. The bar was slipped with a scrape of wood, and the door swung open. A cloaked and masked figure filled the threshold. Peril, Tyler said, trying his best to stand tall when naked and covered in filth. Healed of his hunched back, Tyler now stood a finger's breadth taller than his former squire. He kept his arms folded, not in defiance, but to half hide his black palm print, Marine's mark, that rested in the center of his chest. Peril's eyes narrowed at his condition and turned to the dungeon keep at his side. I thought I left orders for the prisoner to be treated with care. Aye, we have, Sir Knight. We've not beaten him once. Peril pointed to Tyler, his eyes never leaving the guard. Give him your shirt and breeches. Sir, do you defy the word of a blessed knight? A hand settled to the diamond pommel of his sword aglow in the sooty torchlight. No, sir. Right away, sir. The dungeon keep hurriedly stripped down to his underclothes and passed the outerwear to Tyler. I think I was less soiled when I was naked, Tyler grumbled as he pulled the sweat-stained jerkin over his head, but it did feel better to have some clothes on his body. His former squire waved away the dungeon guard and waited until he was gone. Roger had grumbled at the commotion, then curled away and was already snoring again. Alone in private, Peril freed his mouthskin, exposing a worried face. He eyed Tyler up and down, the glint of grace bright in his gaze. Tyler crossed his arms again. I heard there was a death watch. Peril nodded and paced the floor, parts of him slipping into and out of shadow in his as his cloak reflected its owner's agitation. 7 days. It ends this night, when the lesser moon's face touches the greater moon, and there is no hope of her reviving. Peril shook his head. Her heart is gone. The finest alchemists have tested her remaining fluids. There are no signs of grace in any of her humors. She is as empty as any man or woman. Even decay and corruption have set in, bloating her body. Then she is truly dead. Peril stopped his pacing and stared hard at Taylor. This story of some darkly graced beast, you swear this is the truth. Yes, but I have nothing left to swear upon except the filthy body I'm wearing. An unbroken body. A twinge of suspicion laced Peril's words. Unbroken and marked. Tyler parted his jerkin through to expose the black fingers on his chest. This is not a curse. Marine blessed me for some reason, known only to her. But why? Peril began to pace again. It's all impossible. As impossible as a slain god? Tyler read the dismay in the other's eyes. For 4,000 years, ever since the time of the Sundering, none of the 100 had ever died. Every child knew the history of Marilla, of the madness and destruction that followed the arrival of the gods to this world. It lasted 3 centuries until the god Chrism chose the first god realm and imbued his graces into the region, sharing his powers to bring order out of chaos. Other gods followed, settling various lands, bringing to bear their unique graces. Thus the 9 lands were formed. Beyond these god realms lay only the hinterlands, spaces wild and ungoverned, where rogue gods still roamed, as untamed as their lands. Occasional rumors and stories spoke of the death of gods out there, stories of great hinter-kings who slew maddened rogues, raving creatures of dark power. But never had one of the 100 been slain, until now. Peril stared up at the lone window. Night fast approached. Already the Isles have judged you. The word Godslayer rings through the streets. Only my cloak protects you from the gallows or worse, and I thank you for that. Peril turned back to Tyler. But that protection cannot last forever. A single night's cloak is only so thick. As the sun sets, I will board a flippercraft headed to Tashijan to seek the counsel of the full order on your behalf. You waste grace on such an effort, Tyler scoffed. The order has no love for a fallen knight, especially me. I know of your past crime, selling repositals. I so felt this word, repostularies to the grey trade, lining your pocket with gold marches, all preposterous lies. Tyler shook his head. The accusers were true. Peril blinked, looking a surprised boy again. What? How? I had my reasons, but I did not kill that family of cobblers on the Easterbury Street. Your sword was found there. Tyler faced Peril. Do I look a child killer to you any more than a godslayer? No, but then again, I never imagined you a trafficker in repositories. Tyler turned his back to the Shadow Knight. With even that one crime, he had broken his knightly vows. It was reason enough to have been stripped of his graces and cast out of the order, but the crime of murder carried a heavier sentence, to be broken on the will, and then sold into slavery. The caste of great traders at Akabac Harbor knew I was about to expose them. They sought to discredit me. He glanced back to Peril, and they succeeded. So you claimed before the adjudicators, but the soothmensers said you spoke falsely. He lowered his head. And they were not the only ones, Peril whispered. Catherine. Tyler swung around sharply. Do not speak her name in my presence, Peril. I warn you. The young knight did not back down. She said you were gone from your bed that night, and returned bloody to the sheets. And when asked if she believed your claims of innocence, she denied you, a fellow Shadow Knight and her own betrothed. Tyler hardened. I will not speak any more of this. I paid for my crimes and won my freedom in the rings
That was my right, and one of the slaughter you're accused of now. I expect no fairer justice in this matter. I know how it must appear, so let them have me." "I can't," Peril balled a gloved fist. "A god has been slain, not some cobbler's family. Because somehow that's more." I'm like, oh, wow, this really endears me to this Peril guy, because the life of a god is more important than the life of a family that got killed. Which, it might be just a touch due to political reasons, but in the end, people were murdered. They're equal. If for no other reason than to find out how you succeeded in bringing down one of the 100, the Order will intervene. The truth will be known. I have no faith in the Order. Then have faith in me." Tyler saw the pain in the other's eyes. He touched the man's elbow. "You have soiled your cloak enough already, Peril. Stay away before you're dragged down with me." Peril refused to move. "There is much you don't know. As I warned you on the streets, these are dark and perilous times," the young man sighed. "Have you heard about Sir Henry?" "What of the old man?" Tyler asked cautiously. "Henry Sir Gardlin was the warden of the Order, the leader of Tashajan, for as long as Tyler could remember. He ruled the Order and its council with a firm but even hand. It was only through Sir Henry's intervention that Tyler had not been hanged for his crimes. He died, most strangely and suddenly. By all the graces, how? His body was found on the stairs leading up to his tower, his face a mask of horror, his fingertips burned to the first knuckle. Tashajan is keeping the details shuttered. When I left there a half-moon ago, the Order was still in chaos. Factions war behind closed doors, vying for the seat of succession. I can only hope matters have settled to deal with the tragedy here." Tyler stood, stunned. Wasn't he already standing? When did he sit down? In fact, when did he turn away from Peril to turn around and look at him again? But that is not all. Strangeness abounds across all the lands. Over in the fifth land, Tristal of Idlewald has gone into seclusion on his peak, cutting off all graces to his sworn knights. Talk is that he raves. Ulif of Ice Eyrie has frozen his entire Castilian, locking his court in hoarfrost. None can enter or leave, and across the Marishi deep rumors abound of a mighty Hinterking rising on the seventh land, threatening to break out into the neighboring god realms. Tyler shook his head. "I've heard none of this." "Few have. The tidings are scattered and scarce. Perhaps they are merely a spate of bad fortune. But now this." He glanced to the doorway. 10 days ago, Marine sent a raven to Tashijan and requested a blessed courier. You? Peril nodded. It was my honor. Tyler touched his brow in thought. Once gods settled to a land, they were rooted to it, requiring intermediaries, there we go, I got the word out, to carry their messages between them. Only the most important messages were borne by the sworn couriers of the order. I don't know how Marin's death ties to all this, Peril continued, but I sense dark currents in the tides of the world. Something is stirring down deep, out of sight. And you think it struck here, to silence Marin? It seems an extraordinary coincidence that she summons a courier, and the very day I step on this land, she is slain. Peril reached to Tyler, touching his hand. If you spoke the truth about that awful night, then Marin blessed you for some reason, healed you with the last of her grace. She must have championed you for some purpose. I don't know, perhaps it was simply a final kindness for the man who comforted her during her last breath. He remembered the swell of grace in him. His fingers wandered unbidden to the center of his chest, where she had touched him. Did she say anything to you in those last moments? Tyler dropped dropped his fingers and shook his head, then realized he was mistaken. Wait. He focused back to Peril. She did say one thing, but it made no sense. What was it? He struggled to remember the exact pronunciation. Not punctuation, dumb. Riven scar? Peril's eyes pinched. Does that mean anything to you? Peril shook his head. I never heard of such a name. He backed a step, looking slightly paler. But perhaps the scholars at Tarshijan or in Crimsferry will know better. I should be going. There is much to arrange before I can leave, much to ponder. As Peril turned away, Tyler reached out to the edge of his friend's cloak, but he dared not let his fingers soil it. The young Shadow Knight fixed his mouthskin in place and studied his former teacher. Be safe, sir. Tyler let his arm drop. And you, he mumbled, until our cloaks touch again. This is so dumb. It is so really dumb. Reading it is not enough to realize how dumb this sounds. Fantasy world or not, until our cloaks touch again? Is that a metaphor for your cocks? Your hands? Why would you touch each other with your cloaks? What point would any of that serve? It doesn't matter how magical they are. Why would you touch somebody else's cloak? It's like a 5-year-old wrote this and thought it was cool. Or maybe more like 12. Like a 12-year-old boy who thinks talking about piss and shit and rubbing it all over people is funny. Peril said and vanished away. These last words were a common farewell among knights, and a stupid farewell. Tyler turned to face his dank cell with its steaming chamber pot and snoring guest. Even fit in hell again. Fit in hell? Whatever. He felt like no knight. The door slammed behind him, and the bar was shoved in place. The dungeon keep grumbled something about his clothes, but he didn't dare ask for them back. Tyler wondered how long such protection would last once Peril was gone. Roger groaned and rolled to face Tyler. Talkative fellow, that tall, dark one. The thief must have been feigning sleep the entire time. A friend of yours? Tyler settled to his mound of lice-ridden straw that was his bed. Once, and maybe still. Roger sat up. He had much to say, and little else of real worth to offer. What do you mean? Tyler's attention drew sharply toward the bearded and branded fellow. He spoke more keenly than earlier. Even his manners seemed more refined. As a pilgrim, I've journeyed far and wide. I've heard, too, of the dark tidings of which the young knight spoke, and not only in halls and castellans through which your once and maybe again friend walked, but in those many places where the sun doesn't shine as bright. His speech suddenly thickened again, his manner roughened, hunching a bit. Thou'rt many a low tongue thou'll wag to a whipped dog that won't speak to a lording or maid. Tyler knew this true enough himself. The underfolk kept many secrets unto themselves. Then again, Roger continued, there are many in high towers who speak freely at their castellan doors, blind to the ragged pilgrim or on their doorstep. A sly glint blew bright in his eye. Or on the floor of a cell. It seemed sleep was not the only thing the thief had been freeing. There was more to the man than first impressed. Who are you? Tyler asked. Roger started to wag a finger at him, then thought better of it, and used it to dig a flea out of his beard. Just a thief and a pilgrim. An eyebrow rose as he paused in his scratching. Or rather, I say I'm as much a thief and pilgrim as you are a knight? Tyler's head hurt from trying to riddle meaning out of the strange words. Are you truly on pilgrimage? Was your story of Valgar's punishment true? Alas, as true as the stripes on my back, I'm afraid. But one story does not make an entire man, does it? Tyler had to agree. You mentioned hearing other grim tidings on your journeys. What sort of happenings? Rumors, whispers, in the night, tales of black blessings and ilk beasts stirring from the hinterlands. Your young friend has barely nicked the flesh on what's really going on, but he still hit the heart of the matter. Something is indeed stirring out there. What? How in the nether should I know? Roger rolled back to a straw billet. And now that I finally have a bit of quiet, maybe I could get some true sleep. I doubt we'll get much rest this night. Why's that? The bells, Sir Knight. The bells. Tyler had almost forgotten. Marine's death watch ended with the rising of the mother moon. The death bells would announce her passing. They would surely peal all night. He settled back to his own bed and pondered all that had been told him. But his thoughts kept returning to one moment, or rather one word, Ravenscar. What did it mean? Why had Marine blessed him, healed him? Was it for him to be her champion, as Peril had suggested? Was this word supposed to mean something to him? Tyler sensed something unspoken in Peril. The young man had paled with the mention of Ravenscar, but if Peril knew more, why hadn't he spoken? There could only be one answer. Peril must have sworn an oath. Well, the young knight might show his face to a man who had once been his teacher, even protect him. He would never break an oath. Peril had learned that much from Tyler. Rolling to his side, Tyler tried to stop thinking, stop remembering. It hurt too much. Tyler started awake in bed, sitting up. He vaguely remembered dreams of being crippled again, and now waking to his hale body. That must mean healed, but it's really annoying to read it. He felt oddly disappointed. His broken body had sheltered him, hidden him, these long years, requiring nothing of him but survival. But now Tyler had to face the world again, a whole man. He groaned. From beyond the lone window, hundreds of bells pealed, ringing and clanging. The noise was deafening. He glanced upward. Full night had set in. Evening mist flowed in through the high barred window, pouring down like a foggy waterfall. His eyes grew accustomed to the gloom and spotted Roger across the cell. The thief was standing under the window, bathed in mists. "It's all over," Roger said, noting him stir. "The 100 are now 99. Tyler stood, joining him. He had heard the sorrow in the other's voice, despite the thief's calculating and dismissive demeanor earlier. The man understood the loss, felt it deeply. "This is just the beginning," Roger mumbled. "The first blood spill. More will flow, much more." Though the night remained hot and muggy, Tyler shivered. Bells rang and rang, echoing out to sea and beyond. Cries could be heard rising in the night, mournful, pained, angry, frightened. Prayers were sung from a tower top, cast out to the skies. The pair in the cell remained silent, standing under the window for a long stretch. Roger finally turned away, staring at Tyler. "You talk in your sleep, Sir Knight." "So, what does it—" Roger cut him off. "You were speaking in Litric, ancient Litric, the old tongue of the gods." Tyler found his claim doubly odd. First, he was hardly fluent in Litric, and second, how did the thief from the dell even recognize Litric, especially ancient Litric? "What did I say?" he asked, expecting no real answer. "You were whispering. It was hard to make out. Yet you're sure it was Litric?" "Of course. What I did make out was clear enough. You kept saying, Agi one Cly ni one dread Gaul, over and over again." Tyler pinched his brow. "What does that mean?" Roger pulled on his beard and thought, "It's nonsensical. Then it's probably nothing, dream babble, nothing more." Roger seemed not to hear him. "Agi one Cly, break the bone, ni wa dread Gaul, and free the dark spirit." Tyler waved the words away. "As I was saying, dream babble." "Then again," Roger continued, "Cly could mean body rather than bone. Depends on the emphasis." The thief sighed. "And you were whispering. Do you know Litric so well?" Roger dropped his hand from his beard. "Because I once taught it." Before Tyler could inquire about such an oddity, voices arose from the hall right outside the door. The peal of bells had covered the sound of approach. Both men turned as the door was yanked open. Castellanian guards filled the hall, including the captain who had spat at Tyler days ago and named him Godslayer. The dungeon keep backed aside to let in two others. One cowled in a blood-red robe that glowed rootedly in the darkness, rich in graces, and one dressed formally in gray with silver rings on each finger and ear. A soothmaster and a soothmaster and an adjunctionator. Their eyes fell on Tyler. The gray figure stepped forward. Tyler Dinnock, you are to present yourself in the Summer Mount Court to be soothed and judged. Guards sidled in with swords drawn. The captain followed, carrying clanking iron manacles for wrist and ankle. Roger backed aside, mumbling, "It seems your friend's cloak was thinner than ever he supposed." Tyler did not fight his manacles, even when they were snapped too tightly, pinching. Peril was leaving as soon as the death watch had ended. These others must have come for him as soon as he boarded the flippercraft and was away. So much for respecting the command of a Shadow Knight. Poked in the back by the point of a sword, he was led out of the cell. "Bring the pilgrim God Sinner," the soothmaster commanded from under the cowl of his red robe. "His guilt is as plain as the brands on his flesh. On this mournful night we will cleanse our house of all who have blasphemed." Again, it's not really his fault that the god is dead, so he really shouldn't be punished at all. The way must be pure to grieve the loss of the brightness of the Isles. The adjudicator nodded and waved to the guards. There were no additional manacles, so Roger was simply grabbed and hauled. They were led roughly down the rows of cells and up the long winding stairs in the central keep of Summermount, rising out of the dank darkness of the island's natural stone and into the sun-baked, bricked, and tapestried walls of the Castilian. The odor of piss and blood were replaced by the scent of braziers smoking with incenses, sweetwood, dried clove, and sprigs of thistledown. The scents of the Isles, in memory of Marin. The deeper into the Castilian they traveled, the more coiling the odor became. Braziers burned everywhere, as if death and grief could be smoked out and away. Every mirror they passed was shattered to hide the faces of those mourning. Black drapes covered windows to hold back the sun. And over it all, bells rang and rang. Children dressed in black finery ran the halls, even among the guards, carrying small cymbals, clanging away, meant to chase away ghosts. It was supposed to be an act of grief, but spatters of laughter trailed the wake of the little ones. Death was not their concern, not even the death of their god. More somber figures stood at doorways, bearing witness to the procession through the Castilian. Tyler was cursed, spat at. Many carried silver bells, ringing them violently toward him as if trying to beat him with the noise. At last they reached the doors that led into the central court. They were flung wide, and Tyler and Roger were led into the spacious hall beyond. The heavy doors closed behind him, rows of guards falling into place. The great hall, muffled from the bells beyond, seemed deadly silent. Tyler stared at the court. It was plainly adorned, unlike some gods' courts. The walls were painted white, simply decorated with frescoes of twining vines and small purple flowers. 8 windows, thickly draped in black, lined one wall facing the sea. Aligned against the opposite wall stood 7 figures draped like the windows. They might have been statues, except for slight movements, the turn of a head, the shift of an arm. Tyler guessed who they were, the hands of Marin, men and women in service to the late god. Numbered 8, one for each bodily humor. But only 7 stood here now. One was missing. Roger noted them too, and whispered under his breath, "They'll all need a new trade now." Tyler remained focused ahead. A high bench crossed the breadth of the court. Only 2 figures sat there, dressed in gray like their fellow adjudicator. Past their shoulders a tall seat rose, Marine's throne, empty now, but seeming to bear her presence still. The group was led before the high bench. The educator who had collected Tyler from the dungeons climbed the steps and took his seat with the other two educators. An old woman sat in the center, hard-eyed and stoic. "Tyler Denock," she said, "you know why you are brought before this court, to be soothed and judged for the death of Marin, the brightness and light of the Shimmering Isles." Her voice cracked lightly upon naming her god. "How do you speak?" Thrust forward, Tyler stumbled toward the lone chair, painted red, and it stood before the high bench. He knew the procedure well enough, having attended such trials before from both sides. "I swear to all assembled here that I had no hand in the death of the god Marin. I am innocent." "So you have claimed before," the other educator said. He appeared even older than the woman, heavy with weight and age, sagging in his seat. "The Honorable Professor Coruscant has informed us of your past and your fall from grace. He also vouched for you, asking for a stay in this court until the matter could be attended in Tashajan. The Shadow Knights have always served the gods in the realms," Tyler pressed, hoping that Peril's request might still be honored. "I would bow to the courts of Tashajan in this manner." "As you have once before," the educator that brought him here said. "They let you live when you should have been slain for murder so foul. If they had attended their duties without sympathy to one of their own, Marin might still live. Maybe, and then maybe not." Tyler held back a groan. They thought Tashajan had been lenient upon him. If anything, the opposite was true. But his word would not be believed. The folk here had no faith in far-off Tashajan. He tried another tactic. "A court of this import must be attended by those of the order. Shadow Knights were required to be present at trials for murder or serious offense. Then it is fortunate I returned from the outer islands this night." A new voice interrupted. Shadows shifted near the back wall, and a figure unfolded from the darkness, revealing himself. A Shadow Knight, cloaked and featureless behind his malskin. "My name is Darjon, Sir Hightower, the last of the sworn to Marin, the last still living, and before I see my duty done among these islands, I will see her avenged. So fear not, the order is represented here." Tyler's heart sank. No wonder Peril's command to stay this trial had been ignored. They had their own knight, newly arrived, to argue otherwise. "Let him be soothed," the woman said from the bench. "The truth will be known." Tyler was pulled back to the single red chair. His manacles were unlocked and he was roped in place. The red-robed mancer, his face cowled and shadowed with custom, stepped before the bench. He bowed deeply, arms crossed and folded in his sleeve. As he straightened, he pulled a small silver bowl from one sleeve and a glass repository from the other. The latter vial glowed with an inner fire, a mixture of blood and other humors, an alchemic blend known only to the soothmasters. Kneeling, he placed the silver bowl on the floor, whispered prayers of thanks, and poured a few drops into the basin. He stoppered the repository. I hate that word. Every time I read it, I just cannot say it. And it vanished up a sleeve. With his hands free, he dipped his fingers into the bowl, wetting each tip with the glowing crimson mixture. The mancer stood and crossed behind Tyler's chair, his robes sweeping the floor. "Are you ready to put him to the word?" the mancer asked the court. "We are," the trio at the bench responded. Tyler braced himself. He hated being soothed. It was a violation like no other. Wet fingers reached from behind and touched him at temple, forehead, and behind the corner of his jaw. The touch was fire, searing into him, seeming to reach into his skull. He gasped at the burn. The guild of soothmasters bowed to the gods bearing the aspect of fire. The unique blend of alchemies required the blood of such a god. As the grace-fed fire burned through his will, winding to the center of his being, the mancer spoke. "Put him to the word. Let the truth be judged." Near blind from the pain, he heard the first question. "Did you slay Marin?" "No," he gasped out. There was a pause as educators turned their attention to the soothmaster. Tyler had no trust in such a one. He had been soothed before, questioned upon the murder of the cobbler's family. His answer had been the same, denial. But the master had stated he was lying to the court. It had made no sense. Tyler knew the soothmaster to be a good and honest man. He had served the court of Tashijan for many decades. How could he make such a mistake? Only much later did Tyler understand. In his heart, he had indeed felt responsible for the death of the cobbler and his family. They had been slain by the grey traders to discredit him, so in a way he had been the cause of their bloody deaths. The soothmaster at Tashijan must have sensed this deeper guilt in Tyler's heart and answered honestly. Still, it was a mistake. Truth was more complicated than what was written in one's heart. Justice could not always be found so easily. But he felt no guilt for Marine's death. No, he repeated to the court before the master could even respond. How do you find? The lead whatever asked. The soothmaster responded slowly, strained. I am having difficulty reading this one's heart. There is a well of darkness beyond anything I've ever soothed before, beyond anything I could burn through to the truth. The corruption inside this man has no bounds, no depths. He is more monster than man. Tyler squirmed under the other's fiery touch. He lies! I am no worse nor better than any other man. Fingers broke from his skin, releasing him. I cannot read this one. His very touch sickens me. I fear he will corrupt the purity of the grace I bear. The master fell away, legs trembling with true horror. Tyler stared at the accusing eyes. The soothmaster's words doomed him, claiming him evil beyond measure. Only such a corrupt spirit could slay a god. He saw the judgment firm in the eyes of the educators. We must find how he killed Marin, the Shadow Knight said. How? The elder woman asked. How, without the guidance of the soothmaster? There are other ways to loosen the stubborn tongue. Darjan Sir Hightower shifted closer, his cloak billowing outward. Older ways, cruder ways. He has slain our Marin, murdered our realm into a godless hinterland. Let him face the tests of truth from those same barbarous lands. What do you propose? Let me put him to the torture, make him scream the truth. Tyler closed his eyes. He had worn this healed body for such a short time, and it was already going to be taken from him, broken again. So be it, said the woman behind the bench. Don't read this book. It's not worth your time. It's dumb. It's stupid. It's gross. The rape is gross, and I still stand by everything I said about the rape. Just don't read this. There are so many gross things wrong with this book. And I'm done with it. I'm just not going to talk about it anymore because that's how much I don't like this book. So I'm Caleb. This has been Red Knot. Thank you for listening. Bye!